At the time of Canada's formation, the population consisted mainly of British, French, and diverse groups of First Nations people including Cree, Dene, and Ojibwe people. The Métis are frontier people of mixed descent residing on the Canadian Western Plains. During Canada's expanding dominion, the Métis were indispensable. Since the threat of American dominion was real, the Canadian state sponsored expeditions of explorers, surveyors, and settlers. On long voyages, provisions were made to accommodate the voyagers' wives, who were often indigenous or Métis. The voyagers' wives made shoes and clothing for the men, on top of cooking and cleaning. One Arctic expedition in 1853 called for 60 pairs of good moose-skin shoes. All along the way, Métis women made it physically feasible for European settlers to make ambitious treks through unknown territory. So it was the Métis population, particularly the women, who made any western voyages viable. The Hudson's Bay in particular relied on the labor of Métis women. As a cost-saving measure, the company decided instead of importing clothes made by English tailors, they would make use of the skills of local women who were mostly of mixed descent, living at trading posts. In fact, Hudson's Bay management was quoted as saying, "The company would reduce the expense very materially, as the labor would actually cost nothing, it being the duty of the women at different posts to do all that is necessary in regard to needlework." So, when the Hudson's Bay Company sold Rupert's Land to the Canadian state in 1869, it was the Métis women in particular that made such a deal possible. As the Canadian government settled communities further into Western Canada, new settlers often relied on established Métis communities, sometimes even for their very survival. With the support of the Hudson's Bay Company, Lord Selkirk attempted to establish a settlement community in Red River. In the first year, settlers arrived in Red River too late to plant crops. The following years, floods, drought, and early frost left the Selkirk settlers destitute and again reliant on the relationship between Métis hunters and craftswomen. Consequently, their survival during the first harsh winter on the Red River was dependent on the Métis supply of pemmican. Making pemmican required the women to dry buffalo meat, mix with melted fat, and incorporate cranberries or Saskatoon berries. The mixture was then cooled in substantial 41-kilogram bison hide bags, which were also sewn by the women. The dense, high-calorie food suited the needs for the settlers contending with the long winters on the Canadian prairie. Survival for early settlers meant relying on their Métis neighbors. In recognition of indebtedness of settlers to the Métis, the government should begin to view the Canadian economy through the lens of the original caretakers of the land. We can learn from Métis and indigenous craftswomen about how to use resources with reference and connection to the natural world. In their view, women had a responsibility to maintain balance in the natural world. Finely tanned and embellished hides were a means of communicating respect to all-seeing spirits, and sending a hunter into the bush, dressed in fine clothing, pleased the animals. In this way we see the connection between the Métis craftswomen and the natural world. Indigenous leaders continue to demonstrate this worldview against the actions of the Canadian government. The hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en Nation have made news recently by opposing pipeline development on their unceded Unistaten territory. Indigenous resistance to Canadian resource extraction demonstrates a holistic understanding of the relationship between production and the environment. Substituting wind, water, or solar power for natural gas demonstrates an indigenous understanding of the relational connectivity of natural systems. As the formation of the Canadian state and economy has been established from the craft knowledge and capability of Métis women, it is appropriate that we view the Canadian economy through an indigenous lens. Going forward, the government should recognize indigenous ways of knowing in order to reframe how we produce energy.